Welcome to the MSJC Internet Authoring Videocast.
In this video, you'll be learning how to complete Review Assignment 9. In Review Assignment 9, you have your first JavaScript project. JavaScript allows you to do a lot of things. Mainly in this class, we'll be focused on the client-side scripting so that you can manipulate your web pages within the client's web browser and provide interactivity. In Review Assignment 9, then, Hector wants us to create a countdown clock page for the Tulsa Summer Party held on July 4th of every year. He wants the page to show the current date and time, and to include a timer that counts down to the start of the fireworks at 9 p.m. on the 4th. Hector has already completed the page content and needs us to write the JavaScript code. A preview of the completed page for a sample date and time is shown here in this figure. So you can see up in the top left-hand corner shows the current date and time. And then down here we have the countdown clock, shows how many days, hours, minutes, seconds until the fireworks show at 9 p.m. on the 4th. So to get started, we're going to open up tiny tny_july_txt.html and tiny or tny_timer_txt.js. We'll add our name and our date to each file and then save them without the _txt in the file name. So here's the tny July and the tny timer files. So get a name and date there. Let's go ahead and do a save as. Remove the _txt. Then we'll switch over to the HTML file. Add our name and date there. And then save it without the _txt. Step 2 has us go into the HTML file, and directly above the closing head tag we want to insert a script element that'll link to the tiny_timer.js file, and we want to add the defer attribute in the script tag, which will prevent the script file from loading until the entire web page has been loaded into the browser, which is an important thing to know about JavaScript files. Since the JavaScript code that you're going to be writing will act on the HTML elements in a page, we need to make sure that all of those elements are loaded into the web browser's memory before we actually activate our JavaScript code, which will then generally go and look for one or more elements within our web page. So defer is a good way of doing that. So here we are adding the script element. We have an src attribute, points to our tny_timer.js file, and then the defer attribute, which makes it so the script will not be loaded or actually start running in a script until all of the HTML elements have been loaded into memory. In step 3, we're going to take a look at the content and the structure of the HTML file. We want to pay close attention to the ID attributes applied to the different page elements. So we're scrolling down in the HTML file now. Under the body header tags, we've got the nav classed as horizontal. We've got an image, which is the banner image up at the top of the page there, and then the h1 title and h2 title, and then a div here that has an ID of current time, and you can see those are hard-coded values at the moment, so we'll want to change that. And then further down we have the article section followed by an h1 and then the div that's ID'd as countdown. And these 4 divs right here then have hard-coded values that we're going to be changing with the JavaScript code. So this is the actual update timer here. So you can see that we have an ID of D left for days left, an ID of H left for hours left, an ID of M left for minutes left, and an ID of S left or seconds left. In step 4, we're asked to go to the tny_timer.js file, and at the top of the file, insert a statement to tell the browser to apply strict usage of the JavaScript code in the file. So we want to run our JavaScript code in strict mode. So we'll just add that underneath of the comment here, use strict. So that makes it so that the web browser doesn't allow the JavaScript interpreter to go to sloppy mode, which allows for errors to occur in the JavaScript, ignores certain errors, and also actually it can improve the performance of the JavaScript code itself. And you'll see too that in the JavaScript file here, we already have a function built for us, which is next July 4, and then it receives current date as a parameter. So that means that when we call that function, we'll pass a value to it that will represent the current date, and then that function, what that function does then is it takes that current date and evaluates how many milliseconds between the current date and the date that is listed here, which is July 4, 2018. So we actually want to update that to the year that you are working on this project. So what we'll do is we'll pass the current date to it, and then based on the current date, that function will be able to determine how many milliseconds between now and July 4th of the date of whatever year it is that we type in here. So since I'm recording this video in 2022, I'm going to use that as the example. But if you're taking this course in a later year, 2023, 2024, etc., then you want to use the current year instead of 2022. So we'll save that change. In step 5 then, we're asked to go directly above that next July 4 function and insert a new function named showClock. That will not accept any parameters. And then within the showClock function, we've got several steps that we're going to do here, A through G. So we'll go ahead and just add that function in here. Create the body for it. So that's just simply keyword function, the name of the function, which is camel case showClock, empty parentheses, because we're not going to take any parameters in, and then a set of curly braces, and in between those curly braces, then we'll write each of the statements that we're being asked to do in steps A through G. So in step A, we'll first declare a variable named thisDay, and that'll store a date object containing, and then we give us a specified date here, but we're not going to use that date and time because, again, obviously it's in the wrong year for starters. So let's get back to the code here, and a couple of things that I actually want to talk about. First of all, it's always a good idea to comment your code, so I want to add a comment above the function here that just it gives a brief little statement about what the intention of the function is. And then when we add our new variable, I want to comment that as well. So the variable thisDay, so it's var to create the variable, defines that we want to create a variable, then the name of the variable, thisDay in camel case, and then we're using the assignment operator to take the value of a new date object. So date is built into the JavaScript language. So we're going to create a new instance of that date, which will basically look at the client's date and time on their computer, get that information, and then assign that value that it gets to our thisDay variable. And so that's why the comment just reads, store the current date and time. That's what thisDay will have, is the current date and time. In step B, we're going to declare a variable named localDate, and that will contain the text of the date from this day, so the variable that we just created there in the last step. And we want to apply local conventions to that, so that means the toLocale date and string method needs to be applied. And then declare another variable named localTime that contains the text of the time that's stored in thisDay variable using local conventions. So again, the toLocale, this time time string. Now I'm not going to comment those two, Just going to add them in here. So we're going to have var local date. That takes the variable we created above, this day, and then using this function here, toLocaleDateString, converts that date value into the actual date itself. And then in the next line, keyword var, we're naming the variable local time. Again, taking that this day variable, applying the function to it of toLocaleTimeString, so that just takes the time component out of that this day date and then assigns it to local time. So we'll have the date and we'll have the time now that we can display up in the top left-hand corner of the web page. So in step C now, within the inner HTML of the page element with the ID of current time, we want to write this code here. So we're basically generating HTML code now that has a span element around the word date and a span element around the word time. And then the date and the time will be the actual values of the local date and the local time variables. So the instructions give us kind of a hint as to where we're going here with this. We're going to actually need to get that element that has the ID of current time and change its inner HTML property to have new HTML, which is going to be the span, and then local date, and then another span with the local time variable in there. So we'll need to concatenate all that together to create a new HTML value to assign to the HTML property of the current time element. So we're going back to the HTML file, and then up here at the top of the page you can see what we're talking about. So I just want to show you this. This is the div. It's ID'd current time, and right now it has a span with a date and a time that is hard-coded in there. So we want to be able to change this HTML that's currently there and have it display the current time, a current date, and the current time. So to do that, we'll add in this bit of code. Now we're still inside of the show clock function here, so make sure that you're inside of the closing curly brace here when you add this new text. So we do have a comment for this one that reads display the current date and time. Here is the use of the document object applying to it getElementById function and then identifying to the function which ID value it is that we're targeting within the HTML document. So that gets the actual line of code that we were just looking at there in the HTML file. Now the next thing is we want to use a dot notation and identify that we're changing that element's inner HTML property, meaning the code that's in that div already. To do that, we just assign it, so we use the assignment operator, and then we identify the actual HTML code that we want to have written in to that div tag. So it's going to be a string value of span, so that needs to be inside of double quotes, and then concatenate to it the name of the local date variable that gets generated here up above, concatenate to that the closing span tag for the opening span on the first one, and then we have to open up a span now for the next one. So we just put that all together in one string value. So that's a closing span and opening span with inside of a set of quotes there. And then concatenate to that the local time value, and then finally we concatenate a closing span tag, and then that is a single statement there. I mean, if you wanted, you could put this all on one line. It's on two lines just to make it a little easier to read, but that's all one statement, so we just want to end that with the semicolon. Now, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit in the instructions here because I think at this point it's a good time to check and make sure that you've got your code going, that you've got your code written correctly and that it's all working. So if we just go right below the use strict statement there, we're going to make a call to the function that we've been building there, the show clock function. So what that'll do is when the JavaScript code is loaded into memory and it starts processing, the first thing it'll see is this call here to show clock. That means it's going to actually run then the function that we're calling right here. So this is the caller, show clock, and it's just calling the function that we've built here. So let's save that change. Let's go over to our Solution Explorer here, right-click on the tiny July HTML file, view it in the browser, and you should see then the current date of when you're writing this code and the time. Now that's not going to update yet, and we haven't done the timer down here yet, but that's just a good quick check to make sure that you're doing everything correctly. If there are errors, let me just kind of show you this. Let's say we didn't type in show clock correctly. We didn't camel case it. We put it in all lowercase. Let's go back now to our browser. Let's refresh this page. And you'll notice now we're not seeing the current date and the current time. So we've got an error, obviously. So if you press function key 12 on your keyboard to go into your developer tools in your web browser, what you want to do is go to the console tab, and that should show you any errors that you might have in your JavaScript code. So in this case here it says uncaught reference error, show clock is not defined. And the reason that it isn't defined, at least the way the JavaScript interpreter sees it, is that we typed in that function name. Remember, I just did that intentionally. I typed it in all lowercase. JavaScript is a case-sensitive language. Very important that you remember that. So since I didn't type in the function name exactly the way that I did in both spelling and case, when I called show clock, those two don't match up. So the interpreter won't be able to find that function when I call it using a capital C. So when I go back and I fix that error and make the function name actually have a capital C in clock, save it, and then refresh the page again, now it's working again, and then you can see the error's gone away. So as you continue through the rest of this course, you start banging your head against the wall because you have JavaScript errors. That's one of the first things that you should do to check for those errors is open up your developer tools, check the console tab, and generally you will see what the error is there on the console page. Okay, so let's get back to our instructions now. We've done 5A and B and C. So we're up to 5D now. Hector has supplied us with a function named next July 4. And as we said earlier, that returns the date of the next 4th of July. And I should point out, too, if you happen to be in the summer class and July 4th has already passed, or if you're in the fall class where July 4th has already passed, you'll want to indicate the date of the next July 4th as actually being the next year. But if you're in the spring class, and I believe in summer we start early enough that you'll be doing this assignment before July 4th. So it'll probably be just in the fall that that's going to be an issue. So what we're being asked to do here in step D then is to call then that next July 4 function and then assign that value into a variable named J4Date. So we're still working inside of the show clock function. We just want to go underneath of the previous statement there. So I've just added the comment that this is going to assign the July 4th date to J4Date. Then I create the variable J4Date and then assign it the results of running next July 4, the function down below there, and it's passing to it the this day variable that we generated up here. So remember that this day is the current date of the date that you're working on this project, or any time that this page is run from this point forward. In step E now, the countdown clock should count down to 9 p.m. on the 4th of July. So now that we have that J4 date, we want to apply the set hours function to it so that we change the hours value to 9 p.m. because remember that when we got that date, we just used, it was based on this day, and this day, that value is based on 24 hours, And so 9 p.m. is the 21st hour within the day. And so that's how we want to, that's the value that we're going to put in here for set hours. So that'll give us 9 p.m. on July 4th instead of midnight on July 4th. So I'll just put in here a comment, set hour of date to 9 p.m. And then we'll go ahead and just take that J4 date that we created up above, apply using a dot notation here, the function set hours, and then pass to that set hours function. Set hours, by the way, is just a built-in function for the date object. And passing to it 21 as the value, so that means that J4 date now will be set for 9 p.m. instead of 12 p.m. or actually 11:59, I guess 12 a.m. It gets confusing when you hit midnight. In step F now, we're going to create variables named days, hours, minutes, and seconds that will contain those values. So remember that when we ran the function next July 4th, it just returned the number of milliseconds from today's date until July 4th. So we need to take those milliseconds now and apply a little math to them to break down the individual values that are found within that variable, break them out into the actual days, hours, minutes, and seconds that are left. And you've done that in the tutorial. It reminds you here in the hint. It says use the code from the tinyscript.js file in the tutorial as a guide for calculating these variables. So if you wanted to go back to the tutorial and get the values from there, you can. Okay, so there's a comment for the 4 values that we're converting here. So we're creating the var days, var hours, var minutes, and var seconds. So for days, we're taking the J4 date, subtracting from it this day, and then dividing by 1,000 times 60 times 60 times 24. So that'll give us the number of days. Once we have the number of days, then we can calculate the hours. So the hours are the days minus the math floor days. So math floor just rounds down the value, gets rid of the extra decimal places after days, multiplies that times 24. Then once we have the hours, we can get the minutes. We take the hours value, subtract from it the math floor of hours, multiply it times 60. Once we have the minutes, we'll get the seconds, take mins, subtract from it, math floor, mins, and then multiply that times 60. So that gives us the values that we need to actually be able to display it in the countdown counter. Now that we have those values, we need to assign them into the HTML document where the countdown counter is. So just to remind you, we'll go back here to the HTML document. And here is the div ID'd as countdown, and inside of there we have 4 divs, each one ID'd as or abbreviated in the ID there. So days left, hours left, minutes left, and seconds left. So we're going to need to grab each one of these elements here and then put in the appropriate variable that we just created in the step previously. We'll create another comment here. We're going to be displaying the time left until July 4th at 9 p.m. for, and then we have D left, H left, M left, and S left. And so those are the 4 ID values in the HTML document. We're grabbing each one at a time and then just assigning to it the variables from up above here. So days, hours, minutes, and seconds. Just applying the math floor to each one of those, getting rid of the decimal places, or the values to the right of the decimal place. So now in step 6, we've already done this. We've created the call to show clock. Remember, so that we could test out to make sure that we got the initial code correctly that showed the date, and current time. But now what we want to do, in order to be able to make that countdown clock work correctly, we need to call show clock every second so that it continually updates when the viewer is looking at our page. As the time and date value is increasing on their computer, we want to see the countdown clock actually go in a downward direction to show that there's fewer number of days, hours, minutes, and seconds until the 4th of July. So we're going to use the set interval to do that. The set interval function is also built in with the JavaScript language. And so what it's doing is it's taking a function, which is our show clock function, and then actually calling that function at the frequency that we're showing here. So we're saying 1,000 milliseconds, which is 1 second. So the value to the right there of the function name is in milliseconds. And so since we're using the value 1,000, that means we're actually updating the show clock, or calling the show clock function every second. So let's save that, and let's go ahead and run our HTML file in the browser. See that we have the correct date. Notice the time is incrementing, just like a normal clock would. Then we come down to the countdown clock, and you can see it is decrementing. So the countdown clock is telling us 93 days, 10 hours, 55 minutes, and counting down the seconds until the 4th of July at 9 p.m. So that completes Review Assignment 9. Until next time, happy coding. If you liked this video, please click the like button and leave us a comment down below. I also would appreciate it if you would subscribe to our YouTube channel. Also, click the notification bell so that you'll be notified when new videos are posted.